The press conference was meant to be flawless, flashbulbs popping, headlines waiting, Dominic Vale delivering another victory to the world. Then a voice cut through the noise, high, small, unmistakably a child's. He turned and saw her, barefoot, yellow sundress, hair in loose braids, stepping onto the marble platform with nothing but a folded drawing in her hands. Security moved to block her, but she slipped past. "Please," she said, and when he let her speak, she held out the paper. 4 words, written in a child's hand, stopped him cold. "Don't forget me again." The press conference was already running late when the security detail stiffened. Cameras were flashing. Reporters were calling out questions, all of them trying to get the soundbite that would run the next morning on every major network. And at the center of it all stood Dominic Vale. Flawless suit, rehearsed calm, jaw clenched just enough to signal that this wasn't a man who enjoyed wasting time. He was the kind of CEO who made headlines with a single sentence, who could walk into a boardroom and reduce hardened investors to silence with one stare. And today he was here to announce the international expansion of his company, the result of months of meetings, closed-door negotiations, and flights that blurred time zones into a haze. It was supposed to be a routine victory lap, until the interruption. At first he didn't even see her. His eyes were scanning the crowd, picking which journalist he'd acknowledge next, when the murmuring began. A soft ripple, like wind, catching the edge of something unplanned. Then one voice pierced through the buzz. "Mr. Vale." It was high, young, off-key in a room full of professionals. He turned just slightly, and that was when he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 6. Thin arms, yellow sundress, hair in 2 braids, one already coming loose. No shoes, just small bare feet stepping carefully onto the edge of the marble platform like she knew she didn't belong, but had come anyway. In her hands, she held a folded drawing. The guards were already moving, stepping forward out of instinct, ready to remove her, to protect the event. One reached out, but she sidestepped him without fear. "Wait," she said again. "Please." And Dominic, for reasons he wouldn't understand until much later, raised his hand. "Let her speak." The room froze. One of the handlers leaned in close, whispering, "We need to wrap this, sir. You're going to miss the flight." But Dominic wasn't listening. The girl walked the rest of the way to him. The drawing now held out in front like an offering. She didn't shake, didn't look scared. Her gaze locked onto his like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. He knelt down, not caring that his tailored suit would crease or that the entire press corps was filming him from every angle. The girl held the drawing up to him. It was simple. Childish lines, a tall building, a man in a suit, a girl holding his hand. Above them, in crooked letters, "Don't forget me again." Dominic felt something stutter in his chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He swallowed. "For what?" "For making you sad before. Mommy said you cried when she didn't call back." The air left his lungs. He looked at her again, closely now, and suddenly the world tilted. The shape of her eyes, the angle of her chin. 100 memories crashed down all at once. A weekend, years ago, a name, Erin, the one woman he'd never spoken about, the one who'd vanished without a word after telling him it was better this way. He'd believed her. He'd let her go. He hadn't known. The girl looked at him with steady eyes. "I'm Mia," she said. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. For once in his meticulously structured life, Dominic Vale had no script, no plan, no answers. Just one little girl holding a picture that broke him open in front of the world. The silence stretched. No one in the room moved. Not the reporters, not the handlers, not the security team frozen mid-step. All eyes were locked on the man who had spent a decade building an empire from glass, steel, and silence, and the little girl who had shattered all of it with a piece of folded paper and a name that struck him like lightning. Mia. She was still holding out the drawing, her small fingers gripping the edges like it might fly away if she let go. Dominic took it from her slowly, reverently, like she had handed him the blueprints to a life he never realized had been half built. He stared at it. The lines were rough, the colors smeared. The man in the suit had spiky black hair, like he did, and a crooked smile. The girl was smaller, wearing a yellow dress, like the one she had on now. Above them the words, "Don't forget me again." He looked up. Her eyes, hazel, wide, unblinking, locked onto his. "How did you find me?" he asked, barely able to push the words out. Mia hesitated, then said, "Mommy told me your name once. I remembered. I heard it again on the TV and I saw your face." She paused. "You look like the picture I drew." Dominic's throat tightened. "Where's your mom?" "She's gone," Mia said softly. "Last week. She got really sick." The breath he'd been holding collapsed in his lungs. It felt like the world narrowed down to this one truth. The woman he had loved, who had left without goodbye, who had never returned his last message, who had simply vanished, was gone. And she'd left behind this little girl, their little girl. "How long have you been looking for me?" he asked. Mia shrugged as if the answer wasn't important. "A while. I took the train. A nice man helped me find your building, the big one with your name on it. I came because I wanted you to know I'm not mad anymore." Dominic's vision blurred. She wasn't mad. She wasn't asking for anything. She had come to give him something, her forgiveness, her truth, herself. His voice cracked when he asked, "Can I—" But he didn't finish the question, didn't know how to ask what he wanted. If it was okay to touch her, to hold her, to belong. But Mia nodded like she'd heard the whole question anyway. So he opened his arms, and she walked straight into them. The flash of cameras resumed, but Dominic didn't flinch. He knelt there, on the stage meant for financial forecasts and corporate sound bites, holding the daughter he never knew he had until she reached out and made herself known. He held her until the weight of the moment stopped shaking his bones, until the press was ushered out, until someone reminded him again, gently this time, that the jet to Tokyo was waiting. He looked up, still holding Mia. "I'm not going," he said. "But, sir, the summit—" "Reschedule it." "But it's—" "Reschedule it." The aide swallowed and nodded. Dominic stood, lifting Mia easily into his arms. "Do you want to go home?" he asked her. "Where is that?" she asked back. He didn't hesitate. "With me." The car ride away from the press conference was the quietest Dominic had ever experienced, not because there wasn't anything to say, but because nothing he could say felt big enough. Mia sat in the back seat beside him, strapped in carefully with a seatbelt that looked oversized against her small frame. Her yellow dress was wrinkled now, the edge of it stained with whatever she had walked through to get there. She clutched her drawing again, the one he hadn't been able to stop looking at even after she handed it to him. Every few minutes, she glanced at him like she was still trying to figure out if he was real, like he might vanish if she blinked too long. He wanted to ask her 100 things, about Erin, about how long she'd been alone, about what she liked to eat, what made her laugh, whether she slept with a nightlight. But he didn't want to overwhelm her, didn't want her to think that now he was going to start asking for pieces of her after she had so bravely offered him the most important one already, herself. Instead, he asked, "Are you hungry?" She nodded, a little. "Do you like grilled cheese?" She looked at him like he'd offered her a palace. "Best," she said. He turned to the driver, back to the house, and stopped by anywhere that makes decent grilled cheese on the way. When they pulled up to his estate, sleek, modern, cold, in all the ways that used to make sense to him, he realized with a sinking kind of clarity that it didn't look like a home. It looked like a retreat, a fortress, a place built to keep feelings out. And now it was the place where Mia would live. He stepped out first, holding the door for her. She climbed out, still barefoot, still silent, still watching him like she was bracing for something. He didn't know what. Rejection, maybe. The moment he realized she was too much, too late, too real, Instead, he reached for her hand. "Let's go inside." She followed him up the stone path, past the manicured hedges, through the oversized front door. Inside, the polished floors stretched in every direction, the walls filled with art that meant more to his investors than to him. He'd never noticed how empty it felt. Not until now. Mia stepped in and froze. Her voice, when it came, was small. "Do I live here now?" "If you want to," he said. She looked around. "It's really clean." He smiled just a little. "That might change." She didn't say anything to that, but her fingers tightened around his. They ate on the back patio, grilled cheese and tomato soup in bowls too fancy for what they were eating, but neither of them cared. She ate slowly, dipping her sandwich into the soup with the kind of concentration that made him ache. He couldn't stop staring. Every bite, every movement reminded him that she was his, somehow, against all odds, despite everything. "Do you want to take a bath?" he asked after they finished. "I can find something with bubbles." She hesitated, then nodded. "Do you have pajamas?" "I'll have someone bring some," he said, "but for tonight you can wear one of my t-shirts. We'll roll up the sleeves." She nodded again. "Okay." He showed her the guest room closest to his own, a room that had only ever held foreign dignitaries and out-of-town consultants and distant relatives who stayed one night and left early. He opened the closet, realizing for the first time it was empty. She stepped inside and turned in a slow circle, then looked at him. "It's too quiet." "I can fix that," he said. "We'll fill it with things. Books, clothes, music, whatever you want." She stood still for a moment. "Can Bear stay here?" He didn't understand until she pulled a ragged stuffed animal from her backpack. The stitching was frayed. One ear hung loose. Its button eyes were scratched and cloudy. "Of course Bear can stay," he said. She placed it on the bed, then climbed up next to it. She didn't ask about brushing teeth or washing up. She just lay down, suddenly very small, very tired. "Will you be here when I wake up?" she asked. He knelt beside the bed. "Always." Mia nodded once, pulled Bear closer, and fell asleep like she'd been holding that question in her heart for years and had finally let it go. Dominic stayed there long after her breaths turned rhythmic, long after the last sliver of sunlight disappeared from the windows. He watched her sleep, his hand resting lightly on the blanket beside hers. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man at the top of the world. He felt like a man who had just found the one thing worth starting over for. The next morning, Dominic was already awake when Mia's eyes opened. He'd slept in the chair beside her bed, his jacket draped over his shoulders, one shoe still on. The light coming through the curtains was soft and golden, the kind of morning glow that usually filtered through his office windows untouched. But this morning, it filled the room where his daughter slept. He couldn't stop looking at her face. Peaceful, real, not a dream, not a memory. When she stirred, blinking slowly, she looked at him first. Not the room, not the windows, not even Bear. Him. "You stayed," she said, her voice rasped by sleep. "I told you I would." She nodded like she hadn't doubted it, but maybe had still needed to see it for herself. He stood and stretched, his muscles stiff, but he didn't complain. "You want breakfast?" "What kind?" "Any kind." She smiled sleepily. "Cereal with bananas." "Coming right up." He paused at the door, then turned back. "I'm glad you came." Mia didn't say anything right away, but she hugged Bear tighter. Then, "I think Mommy wanted me to. I think that's why she told me your name." He stood there for a moment, unable to speak. Then he gave her the smallest nod and disappeared down the hall. He had never sliced a banana onto cereal before, but he did it now with surgical precision, placing each piece like it mattered, because to her it probably did. They ate at the breakfast nook, sun pooling on the table, the city skyline barely visible through the windows. It was the first breakfast Dominic had ever had at home on a weekday in nearly a decade. She told him about her favorite cartoon, something about talking vegetables, and he listened like it was a market report. She asked about his company and what exactly a conference was. He explained that it was a bunch of people in suits saying important things, but most of it could wait. "Are you going to be late for work?" she asked. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Mia grinned. "Good, because I have plans." "Plans?" "First, we go get me some shoes, then pajamas, then we need a nightlight and books, and maybe a dog. But that one can wait." He laughed, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in weeks. "A list. Ambitious." "I've had time to think." "I can see that." They went shopping later that day. Shoes first, then clothes, then a trip to the bookstore that turned into 2 hours of her reading every single back cover before choosing 5. At one point, he caught her holding up a pink T-shirt with glittery lettering that said, "Love makes a family." She didn't ask if she could get it, she just added it to the pile. He paid for everything without blinking, but the shirt stayed with him more than any receipt. They stopped for ice cream on the way home. Chocolate, 2 scoops, sprinkles. She sat on the curb, swinging her legs, looking up at the sky like it had answers. "You were supposed to get on a plane," she said suddenly. He looked over. "Yeah, I was." "But you didn't." "No." She licked her cone slowly. "Why?" He stared out at the street for a long moment. "Because someone more important showed up." Mia nodded, thoughtful. "I think Mommy would have smiled about that." He didn't answer. He couldn't. But he reached out and wiped a streak of chocolate from her cheek, and in that small gesture was everything he couldn't say. They drove home in comfortable silence. No music, no rush, just the sound of the road and her breath and the occasional sound of Bear sliding in the back seat. That night she wore her new pajamas, chose her new toothbrush, read one of her new books out loud until she yawned halfway through a sentence and collapsed into the pillows. He tucked her in and sat beside her until her breathing slowed. Before he stood to leave, she whispered, "Daddy?" The word hit him like thunder. "Yeah," he said, his voice barely holding steady. "Thanks for not flying away." He bent down and kissed her forehead. Never again. And in that moment, Dominic Vale, who once believed empires mattered more than people, understood that nothing he'd ever built could compare to the quiet weight of being someone's home. The next few weeks unfolded like pages in a book neither of them wanted to end. Every day began with the same small, sacred routine. Dominic making breakfast, while Mia padded around barefoot in her favorite sparkly pajamas, Bear tucked under one arm. They'd eat together at the kitchen table, and she'd quiz him on serial trivia or ask him to tell her stories from back when you were a boring grown-up with no daughter. He never corrected her. She was right. He had been boring. He just hadn't realized it until now. He took fewer meetings, turned down 3 speaking engagements, delegated for the first time in his career without micromanaging. The press couldn't make sense of it. The business blogs speculated, was he stepping back, sick, planning to sell the company? None of them guessed the truth, that he was finally stepping into the part of his life that mattered most, and he didn't care what they thought. All that mattered was the little girl, who now had shoes in the entryway, clothes in the laundry basket, and drawings taped to the refrigerator like priceless museum pieces. Her world had bled into his so seamlessly it was hard to believe she hadn't always been there. They visited Aaron's grave one quiet Sunday. Mia held a bouquet of daisies. "Because they look like smiles," she said, and stood quietly while Dominic brushed leaves off the headstone. Neither of them said much at first. Then Mia crouched and placed the flowers gently at the base. "I miss her," she whispered, "but I think she's not lonely anymore. She knows I found you." Dominic knelt beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "I think she always wanted us to find each other." "Even if it took a long time?" He nodded, "especially then." They stayed until the sun dropped low and the shadows stretched long across the grass. On the ride home, Mia fell asleep, Bear resting against her cheek, her fingers still curled around one of his. Later that night, while she colored at the kitchen table, Dominic stood by the window, phone to his ear. Margaret, his longtime attorney and closest confidant, was on the other end, quiet, while he explained everything. "She's mine," he said simply. "She didn't ask for it, but she came anyway. And I don't want her to leave." There was a pause. "You're asking me to start the adoption process?" "Yes." "You understand what that means? Legally? Publicly?" He turned and looked at Mia, who was humming softly to herself as she filled a page with stars. "It means I'm her dad, and I want the world to know it." Margaret promised to begin the paperwork immediately. There would be interviews, background checks, home assessments. The courts would want proof of stability, of intent, of paternity. Dominic was ready. He told Mia that night, gently, what it meant. "That piece of paper will say what we already know," he explained, "that we're family." She smiled. "Will I get a new name?" "If you want." She thought for a second, then nodded. "I want your name, so people know I'm yours." His throat closed up. "You've always been mine." That night he didn't go to his office. He sat in her room until she fell asleep. And then, for the first time in years, he opened the old photo album Erin had left behind, one that he hadn't dared touch since the day she disappeared from his life. There were photos of them, young and laughing. A weekend at a cabin, a blurred picture of him pretending to build a fire while she teased him from behind the camera. One of her at a cafe table, holding a coffee cup in both hands, smiling at someone just off frame. Him. And then, at the very back, a photo he hadn't seen before. Erin, pregnant, standing in front of a mirror with one hand on her stomach, her eyes calm, her smile small and sure. She had always meant for him to find out. She just hadn't known how to let him in. He closed the album slowly, holding it like it was something sacred. Then he stood, walked down the hall, and peeked into Mia's room. She was asleep, hair spread across the pillow, Bear tucked under one arm. He whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner." But she didn't stir, because she already knew. He had found her now, and he wasn't letting go. The adoption hearings began in early spring, just as the cherry blossoms bloomed outside the city courthouse. Dominic sat beside Mia on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, the same suit he wore to billion-dollar board meetings, now slightly wrinkled from kneeling to help her tie her shoes. She was quiet, hands folded in her lap, Bear peeking out of the backpack at her feet. Her hair was pinned back with sparkly clips she'd chosen herself that morning, and she wore the shirt that said, "Love makes a family." Dominic had tried not to cry when she came downstairs in it. He didn't entirely succeed. "Are you nervous?" he asked softly. Mia shook her head. "Are you?" He smiled. "A little." "Why?" "Because I want them to say yes." She leaned her shoulder into his. "They will." The courtroom was smaller than he expected. Simple walls, a single flag. No grand jury box or dramatic lighting like in the movies, just a judge with kind eyes and a desk full of papers, a clerk in a tidy blazer, and Margaret seated at the petitioner's table, ready with a folder so thick it had to be clipped at the corners to keep from spilling open. Dominic held Mia's hand as they approached the bench. The judge looked over the file, glasses perched at the edge of her nose. "Mr. Vale, I've reviewed your application, your statement, and your background documents. Everything appears in order." He nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge looked down at Mia, who stood calmly beside him. "Miss Mia, may I ask you a question?" Mia nodded solemnly. "Are you happy with Mr. Vale?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Do you want him to be your father?" "Yes." "And are you ready for your last name to change?" Mia took a deep breath, then smiled. "I already changed it at school, on my pencil box. It says Mia Vale now." The judge chuckled softly, then looked at Dominic. Anything you'd like to add? He looked down at Mia, then back at the judge. I thought I had everything, he said. I had money, power, influence. I built a life that people envied, but it never felt like it belonged to me. Until the day she walked into that press conference, I didn't know I was missing anything. But since that day, I've seen the world through her eyes, and I finally understand what matters. She's not just my daughter on paper. She's my daughter in every moment that's changed me for the better. I didn't make her, but I will choose her every day for the rest of my life. The judge's gaze softened. In that case, she said, tapping her pen against the desk, let the record show that Mia Erin Vale is now officially and irrevocably the legal daughter of Mr. Dominic Vale. Mia squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. He looked down at her and mouthed, We did it. She whispered back, Told you they'd say yes. The courtroom clapped, quiet, respectful applause. Dominic picked her up right there in front of everyone, holding her close, burying his face in her hair. He didn't care that his tie was crooked, or that Margaret was crying in the front row, or that the clerk had to remind them to collect the adoption certificate. None of it mattered, because Mia Vale was his, not just by name, but by everything that counts. Outside, under the bright morning sky, he knelt in front of her and handed her a small velvet box. She opened it carefully. Inside was a charm necklace, a tiny silver bear. For the day bear brought you to me, he said. Mia didn't speak. She just hugged him, arms around his neck, heart pressed against his. And in that moment, Dominic realized this wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of the life he was always meant to live. Summer came in soft waves, the kind that wrapped themselves around the days so slowly you didn't notice until suddenly the air was warmer, the evenings were longer, and the house was alive in a way that didn't need permission anymore. Mia thrived. Not dramatically, not in ways that made headlines or drew cameras, but in the quiet, beautiful ways that only a child beginning to feel safe could. She started sleeping with the door closed. She asked for seconds at dinner without apologizing. She began leaving her drawings all over the house, taped to mirrors tucked into Dominic's work bag, slipped under his pillow, like secret messages he was meant to discover one at a time. Her laughter filled the space between conference calls. Her questions filled car rides. She wanted to know everything, how elevators worked, why rain smelled different in the city, if Bear would ever get his own birthday. Dominic answered every question like it was a matter of national importance, because to her it was. He no longer measured success in quarterly growth or stock prices. He measured it in small things. How many new foods she was willing to try. Broccoli, no. Sushi, maybe. How many words she could read aloud without help. How easily she slipped her hand into his when they crossed the street. He framed one of her drawings and hung it in his office. Below the sketch of two people, him and Mia standing beneath a tree with stars in its branches, she'd written, "Home isn't where you started. It's where someone decided to stay." One night, weeks after the court date, she found him on the balcony staring out over the skyline, lost in thought. "Do you miss your old life?" she asked, curling up beside him. He looked at her, the city glowing behind her, and said without hesitation, "Not for a second." She tilted her head. "Even the fancy meetings? Even those? Even the private jet?" He laughed. "Especially the jet." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm glad you missed your flight." "Me too." And in that moment he realized she wasn't talking about that one day in the press conference anymore. She was talking about every choice since then, every no that made room for this, yes. Every moment he could have stepped away, but didn't. In the fall, Mia started third grade. She picked out her own backpack, a teal one with a planet on the front, and wore a necklace with her silver bear charm to school every day. She came home with stories, friends, new favorite books, questions about space and science, and why adults sometimes cried when they were happy. She'd learned to bake muffins, started a journal, told him quite confidently that she was going to be a teacher and an artist, and also maybe a paleontologist if time allows. He built her a treehouse, spent an entire Saturday falling off ladders and muttering under his breath until she finally peeked out the kitchen window and shouted, "Dad, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to feel like me." And just like that, he stopped trying to make it flawless. Instead, he made it theirs. Winter came again. 1 year since she walked into that press conference and changed everything. Dominic threw a party, not for the cameras, not for the shareholders, for her. Just them and a handful of people who mattered. Jody, Marcus, Margaret, Clara, the social worker who had first said, "Let her speak." Mia wore a yellow dress, just like the first day, but this one had tiny stars embroidered on the sleeves. She gave a speech at dinner. No one had asked her to. She just stood up on a chair, bear in her hand, and said, "A year ago, I didn't have a home. Then I drew a picture. And now I have a dad, a family, a treehouse, and my own room where I feel safe. So if anyone ever tells you that wishes don't work, you can tell them they're wrong." Everyone clapped. Dominic clapped the loudest, and when she sat down beside him, he kissed the top of her head and whispered, "Thank you for choosing me." That night, when she was asleep and Bear was resting beside her with a new miniature scarf Jody had knitted just for him, Dominic sat alone for a long time, not because he was sad, but because he was full of gratitude, of awe, of love he never knew he was capable of. He looked at the framed drawing again, "Don't forget me again," and realized it had become something else. Not a warning, not a wound, but a vow, a beginning, a reminder of the day he let himself be interrupted and found the one thing in his life that truly mattered. Because sometimes everything changes in a moment. A voice calling out, a drawing in small hands, a child brave enough to believe they still mattered, and a man finally brave enough to answer. The following morning, Dominic woke early again. Not because of the alarm, but because of the soft sound of Mia's footsteps padding down the hall. He didn't move right away. He just listened. It had become a kind of ritual now. Her quiet steps, the creak of the kitchen stool as she climbed up to sit at the island, the faint rustle as she pulled Bear into her lap, and waited. Not demanded, just waited. It broke him in the gentlest way every single day. When he stepped into the kitchen, she was already flipping through the new book they'd picked out from the bookstore the day before. Her hair was wild with sleep. Her pajama top was inside out. And yet she looked up at him like he was the beginning of the day. "I think Bear wants oatmeal today," she said. "With raisins?" Dominic nodded, pulling ingredients from the cabinet. "Any reason?" He said it's a cozy kind of morning. Well, Bear would know. As the oatmeal simmered, he leaned on the counter watching her. She was so comfortable now, at ease. This wasn't a visit. This wasn't a novelty. This was home. Later that day, they had their first official visit from the family case assessor. Dominic had prepared everything. The house was clean, but not sterile. Mia's room looked lived in, with books scattered, art taped to the walls, and Bear sitting proudly in his usual corner. The living room had their movie night blanket still folded on the arm of the couch. It was real. It was honest. And for once, Dominic didn't feel the need to stage anything. The case assessor, a woman named Ramona, arrived exactly on time. Mia answered the door. "Hi," she said confidently. "I'm Mia Vale. My dad's waiting in the kitchen. Want some lemonade?" Ramona blinked, then smiled. "That would be lovely." Dominic stayed calm through the questions. Employment, emotional preparedness, legal intentions. Mia answered hers with equal grace. "Favorite food? Grilled cheese? Favorite memory so far?" "When we fell asleep in the treehouse because we stayed up too late watching the stars." Favorite thing about her new home? "I don't have to pretend I'm okay when I'm not." That one stopped Ramona in her tracks. After she left, Dominic sat down beside Mia on the back porch, the sun warm across the wooden steps. "You did great today," he said. She didn't look at him, just played with a leaf in her fingers. "Did I say too much?" "You said the truth." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "It's scary when people ask questions about your forever." He looked out at the yard. "Yeah, it is. But it's scarier when no one asks at all." He nodded. "I know that too." That night she asked if she could sleep in his room. She hadn't asked that since the first month. "Just for tonight," she said. "I had a weird dream, not bad, just weird, like the kind that makes you miss someone, even if you don't know who." He let her climb into the bed, Bear already tucked under one arm. She curled into his side without another word, and they stayed like that, breathing in the dark. At one point, she whispered, "Did you ever think your life would be like this?" "Never," he said, "but now I can't imagine it any other way." "Me neither." She fell asleep quickly. He didn't. He lay there staring at the ceiling, the sound of her breathing anchoring him in a way no contract or headline ever had. All the things he'd once thought were so important, timelines, expansion strategies, quarterly goals, had taken a back seat to whether she liked strawberry jam or grape, whether she slept through the night, whether she believed he'd still be there in the morning. And every time he thought about the press conference, the moment that started it all, he realized it hadn't been an interruption. It had been an invitation. The next big change came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Dominic had just returned from a rare in-person board meeting, one he hadn't even wanted to attend, but had shown up for out of obligation. He walked through the door, loosened his tie, and found Mia waiting in the living room, her knees pulled up to her chest, a folded paper in her lap. Bear sat beside her like he was guarding something important. She looked up when he walked in, and he knew right away this wasn't going to be a normal after-school chat about spelling tests or how the cafeteria ran out of mac and cheese. "Hey," he said, setting his briefcase down. "You okay?" She nodded. "Yeah, I need to ask something, but it's big." He didn't hesitate. "Okay, I'm listening." She unfolded the paper and handed it to him. It was a school assignment, a worksheet titled "All About My Family." Half of it was filled out already, her name, her age, her favorite food, still grilled cheese, her favorite person, my dad. But near the bottom, in her careful handwriting, she'd written, "I don't know how to explain my mom," and next to it, in parentheses, "It makes my chest feel tight." Dominic sat down beside her, heart twisting. "You wrote this today?" She nodded. "I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to talk about it in front of the class." "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to explain her to anyone, not unless you want to." She picked at the edge of the couch cushion. "Do you ever miss her?" He answered honestly, "Yeah, I do. Even though we didn't get to finish things, even though I didn't know about you yet." "I think about her sometimes," Mia said, voice small. "Like, if she were still here, would I still have found you? Would she have let me?" He exhaled slowly. "I don't know, but I believe she wanted you to be safe, and I believe she trusted you to find what you needed." Mia looked up at him. "And I needed you." "And I needed you," he echoed. There was a long pause before she said, "Can I write that on the paper? That my mom isn't here, but she helped me find the person who would be." "I think that's beautiful," he said, voice thick. They filled out the rest of the worksheet together. When they got to the part that asked, "What do you love most about your family?" Mia didn't even blink before writing, "They always come back." Dominic watched her as she signed her name at the bottom. She no longer hesitated when writing Mia Vale. She no longer asked whether it was okay. It was hers, fully, entirely. Later that night, as the rain tapped gently against the windows and she curled up beside him with Bear and a new book, she said, "I'm not afraid of being forgotten anymore." He looked at her, the weight of her words heavier than anything that had ever been handed to him in a boardroom. Why's that? Because now, if I draw a picture, she said, you'll always be in it. Fall brought with it the scent of cinnamon in the kitchen and leaves crunching under Mia's boots as she ran up the driveway after school. Dominic had started picking her up himself, something his schedule never would have allowed a year ago. Now it was blocked out on his calendar like any major acquisition, only it mattered more. She always spotted him before he spotted her. "Dad," she'd shout, backpack bouncing, Bear's little keychain version clipped to the zipper now, because he gets bored at home all day. Dominic would wave, crouch, catch her as she barreled into him, and carry her bag like it weighed nothing. She would chatter the whole ride home, about everything and nothing, which kid cried in music class, what she drew during indoor recess, why they were starting multiplication even though everyone clearly hates it. One afternoon, as she tossed her shoes by the front door and flopped dramatically onto the couch, she said, "I want to do a family photo." Dominic looked up from his laptop. "Like a selfie?" "No, like a real one, with a photographer, and nice clothes and a frame, like the ones other kids have." He set the laptop aside. "Okay. Really?" "Yeah." "You won't be weird about it?" "Only slightly." She laughed. "I want Bear in it too." "Naturally." They scheduled it for a weekend. Mia picked the outfits, light blue sweaters and jeans. So we look cozy, but not like we tried too hard. She brushed Bear's fur and pinned a tiny bow to his ear. The photographer, a young woman named Camilla, set up in the garden behind the house. The light was golden, the leaves just starting to fall. "Stand here," she said gently. "Hold hands. Look at each other, not the camera." Mia slipped her fingers into Dominic's and grinned up at him. "Say cheese?" "Cheese," he whispered. But his eyes were already misting. They took 100 shots, laughing, spinning. Bear perched on Mia's shoulder in one, tucked under Dominic's arm in another. When the proofs arrived a week later, Mia laid them all out on the dining table, studying each one like a curator preparing an exhibit. "This one," she said finally, tapping the image. It showed the two of them sitting cross-legged in the grass, their foreheads pressed together, Bear in her lap. She was smiling. He was crying, and it was perfect. They had it framed in wood and hung above the fireplace where his diplomas used to be. One night, weeks later, as they curled up for movie night with popcorn and mismatched socks, Mia looked at the photo and said, "That's the moment I knew it was real." "What was?" Dominic asked. "All of it," she said. "That I wasn't temporary anymore." He didn't speak, just pulled her closer. Her head rested on his chest. Bear wedged between them. The movie played. Time moved. But in that moment, everything that mattered was already right there. Winter came softly, blanketing the city in a layer of quiet that seemed to hush even the usual noise of traffic and deadlines. The holidays approached, and with them came traditions, some borrowed, some invented entirely by Mia. She decided they needed 12 days of celebrations. Not the singing kind, but 12 days of doing stuff that feels like home. On day one, they made cinnamon pancakes and ate them in pajamas until noon. On day two, she built a blanket fort in the living room and declared it the not-so-secret headquarters of the Vale family. On day three, they made cards for the staff at the shelter where Mia had once spent 2 nights before she found Dominic. She didn't tell him that until they were halfway through gluing glitter on the paper. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded, handed her another marker, and said, "Make it extra sparkly." They bought a tree together. Mia insisted on a real one, and decorated it while music played and Bear wore a Santa hat. She hung the ornaments like they were ancient relics, each one assigned a meaning. "This one's for the first grilled cheese. This one's for when we built the treehouse. This one's for the day I learned what forever feels like." Dominic didn't bother hiding the tears anymore. She caught him sniffling by the mantel and offered him a candy cane like it was a solution to everything. On Christmas morning, she woke him before dawn, whispering, "Dad, it happened. The presents are here." She was right. Beneath the tree sat neatly wrapped boxes, but nothing mattered more than the one she gave him. It was a shoebox, covered in paper she'd drawn herself. Inside was a scrapbook, handmade, messy, perfect. The first page held the photo from their family shoot. The second was the drawing she had once walked into his press conference holding, creased, worn, but still clear. "Don't forget me again." Below it in her handwriting was something new. "You didn't." He couldn't speak. Not for a long time. He just reached for her and held her until the sun rose behind them and the light filled every corner of the house they had turned into a home. Later that evening, after the gifts were unwrapped and the cocoa finished, Mia climbed into his lap and looked up at him with a seriousness he recognized now as her thinking voice. "I don't remember all the days before," she said, "but I remember all the ones after." "After what?" he asked. "After you stayed," she said simply. And just like that, Dominic Vale, a man who had once missed his flight and found something far more important, realized that some moments don't change you instantly. They choose you slowly, quietly, over breakfast, over bedtime stories, over questions about dinosaurs, and dreams about space. Until one day you look around and realize you've built a life that fits you better than anything you had before. All because someone small and brave and sure walked into your world holding a drawing and gave you the chance to become who you were always meant to be. The new year came not with fireworks or loud music, but with the steady rhythm of a home that had finally settled into itself. Mia stayed up until midnight, wrapped in a blanket beside Dominic, her head on his shoulder and Bear tucked securely in her arms. They watched the countdown on TV, not with wild cheers, but with quiet smiles and a shared bowl of popcorn between them. When the clock struck 12, she turned to him and whispered, "We made it." And he knew she didn't mean the night. She meant the year, the change, the leap from what had been to what now was. He kissed the top of her head and whispered back, "We did." January brought more school projects, more books from the library, more drawings left on his desk at work, with sticky notes that said things like, "For brain breaks," and "This is what your face looks like when you're trying to cook." She was herself in every room now, singing in the hallway, asking big questions in the car, falling asleep mid-sentence on the couch without fear of being too much or in the way. She belonged, fully, utterly. And Dominic had never known that belonging could feel like this. One night, just after dinner, she brought out a cardboard box she had been secretly filling for weeks. "It's for you," she said, pushing it toward him. Inside were a dozen folded drawings, a few of her old stuffed animals, the glitter star she'd made the week after he missed his flight, and a small envelope. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sentence in her handwriting. "Thank you for being the person who didn't walk away." He stared at it, eyes stinging, and pulled her into his arms without a word. That night, as he stood in the doorway of her room, watching her sleep, he thought about all the things he used to chase: success, control, perfection, and how none of it had ever made him feel this full, this necessary, this deeply, quietly enough. She stirred under the blanket and mumbled, "Night, Dad." "Night, Mia," he whispered back. "Always." And he meant it, for every day behind them, for every day ahead, because she had interrupted his press conference holding a drawing, and he had missed the flight on purpose, and it had led him home. February brought its own kind of softness. The city, usually harsh in winter's grip, seemed to quiet itself just a little more that month. There were fewer sirens, more cloudy mornings, and just enough sunshine to melt the frost on the windowsills of the Vale house. Mia had taken to leaving sticky notes all over the place. On the mirror, "Don't forget your smile." On the fridge, "Bear says apples are important." Even on his laptop, "You're allowed to close this now." Dominic kept every one, tucked them in drawers, framed one or two. They weren't decorations, they were proof of something real. Evidence that someone in this house thought of him when he wasn't looking. One afternoon, Mia came home from school quiet. Not sad, just thoughtful. She sat at the kitchen island, legs swinging under her chair, Bear propped beside her like usual. Dominic was making pasta, and she waited until he set the water to boil before saying, "There's a girl in my class who asked if I was adopted." He turned slowly, giving her his full attention. "And what did you say?" "I said, yeah, but not like the sad kind." "What kind, then?" "Like the kind where someone says, 'You're mine now,' and then means it." Dominic smiled, but she wasn't done. "She asked if I ever think about before, about what it was like before I had you. And I said, sometimes, but I remember it like a book I finished already. I don't want to read it again, but I'm glad I kept going to the end." He walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder, gently. "You can talk about it any time you want. The before stuff. You don't have to protect me from it." "I know," she said. "That's how I know I don't need to." And just like that, she returned to drawing a cartoon bear with sunglasses in her notebook, like she hadn't just split his heart wide open and filled it with something weightless and sacred. That weekend, they took a trip to the mountains, just the two of them. A tiny cabin with no internet, board games stacked to the ceiling, and a fireplace that took 3 tries to light. Mia built a snowman with tree branches for arms and Bear's bow tie around its neck. Dominic made hot chocolate and burned the first batch of marshmallows. They laughed so hard he forgot for a moment that he had ever known a world without her. At night they sat bundled under one giant quilt, reading by lantern light. She fell asleep before the end of the chapter, her head against his side, the book slipping from her hand. He stayed there for hours, not reading, not moving, just listening to the sound of her breathing, the snow falling outside, and the fire crackling beside them. It was the most peace he'd ever known. On the last day, just before they packed up, she stood at the edge of the woods and asked, "Do you think some people don't get found?" "What do you mean?" he asked, following her gaze. "Like, if I hadn't come that day, if I hadn't drawn that picture, what if I didn't get found?" He knelt beside her, brushing her hair back gently. "You would have been found, one way or another, but not by you. Maybe not. But I like to think the world would have found a way." She nodded slowly. "I think so too. I think it was trying really hard." "Me too," he said. "Because you didn't just find me, Mia. You made me." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Then we found each other." And that was the truth. 2 lives, 2 timelines, 2 broken pieces wandering through the noise of the world until they collided. Until she stepped into the spotlight, held out a drawing, and said, in her own quiet way, "See me, choose me, stay." And he had. Every single day since. Spring returned like a promise kept. The world outside bloomed in soft greens and bright yellows, the trees along their street shifting from bare limbs to slow-dancing branches covered in buds. Mia started leaving the windows cracked in the morning so she could hear the birds while she got ready for school. She called them the background singers to my thoughts. Dominic watched her grow into the season, the way flowers tilt toward sunlight, her hair longer now, her steps more confident, her voice less cautious. She wasn't waiting to be given space anymore. She simply moved through the house like it belonged to her. Because it did. One afternoon after school, as Dominic stood in the kitchen chopping fruit for her snack, she sat at the island drawing again. This time, she was focused, serious. Colored pencils in neat rows, head tilted as she shaded in the lines. "What you working on?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, without looking up, she said, "My teacher said we're doing a class yearbook. We each get a page. I'm making mine." "Want help?" "Not yet." It's almost done." 20 minutes later, she turned it around and pushed it toward him. He expected to see the usual: favorite color, best subject, silly doodles. What he saw stopped him cold. It was a timeline, not of events, of feelings. Little illustrations labeled with emotions, drawn in sequence like stepping stones across a river. The first was a girl sitting on a bench, her shoulders hunched, the caption beneath it, "Mostly invisible." The next was her walking into a tall building with a drawing in her hand, scared but hoping. The third was a man kneeling and listening. Maybe this is a beginning. And then a swirl of light and stars and color that led into the final image, her, smiling, sitting on the shoulders of that same man, Bear waving from her arms, the caption, "This is what safe looks like." Dominic couldn't speak. His throat closed around the words before they could form. She watched him carefully. "Too much?" "No," he whispered. "It's everything." She smiled and took it back. "Then I'll write that at the top. Everything I didn't know how to say, but drew instead." She set the paper aside and picked up a slice of apple. "Want to know the best part?" "What?" "That none of the pictures are the end." And she was right. Because life wasn't a straight line. It wasn't a press conference or a flight missed or even a judge's gavel. It was every moment after. It was Monday mornings when Bear wore socks. It was Wednesday, spelling tests, and Friday pizza nights, and quiet Saturday spent painting rocks in the backyard. It was ordinary and stunning and real. Later that night, as he tucked her into bed, she looked up at him and asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't drawn that picture?" He nodded. "All the time." "Me too," she whispered. "But I think that was the first time I believed I deserved to be seen." Dominic leaned in and kissed her forehead. "You were always meant to be seen, and you'll never be unseen again." She fell asleep smiling, Bear tucked into the crook of her arm. And as Dominic stood in the doorway watching her, he thought about the man he'd been before, powerful, respected, alone, and how in one unexpected moment the world had handed him the one thing he hadn't known he needed, someone small and brave enough to rewrite the story. Summer arrived with long evenings, melting popsicles, and the kind of laughter that drifted out through open windows like music no one ever turned off. Mia's school year ended with a celebration in the auditorium where she stood on stage and read a poem she'd written herself. Dominic sat in the front row, heart pounding like it was a boardroom pitch, though nothing about this moment had anything to do with business. She stood behind the microphone, knees shaking just a little, and read clearly, confidently, every word ringing out into the room. "My name is Mia, and I am not lost. I am found and growing. I am not waiting. I am building. I am not afraid of the past. I hold it gently and let it go. I am not quiet because I'm small. I'm quiet because I'm listening. And when I speak, it's because I know who I am." The audience clapped, but Dominic couldn't move at first. His heart was too full, his eyes too wet. Mia stepped off the stage and walked straight into his arms like it was where she'd been heading all along. "Did I say it okay?" she asked. "You didn't just say it," he whispered. "You became it." They spent the rest of the summer writing their own kind of story, not one for the news or social media or public approval, just theirs. Road trips to small towns where Mia insisted on buying magnets from every gift shop. Ice cream for dinner more than once, a visit to Aaron's hometown, where Mia left a tiny stone with her name etched into it beneath a tree and whispered, "Thanks for letting me go find him." Dominic didn't say a word. He couldn't. He just knelt beside her and stayed there long after the sun had begun to dip behind the hills. One August night back home, as crickets chirped outside and the house hummed with a day well lived, Mia sat beside him on the porch and said, "You know what I figured out?" "What's that?" he asked, smiling over the rim of his iced tea. "A story doesn't have to start happy to have a good ending. "That's true," he said, "but ours isn't ending yet." "I know," she said, "that's the best part." He looked out at the quiet street, the stars beginning to blink awake, and realized how far they had come. From the moment a little girl had stepped into the middle of his life and handed him a picture that said, "Don't forget me again," to this porch, this summer, this bond that had grown roots deeper than he ever thought possible. He reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'll never forget you," he said. She didn't look up. She just smiled, eyes still on the sky, and whispered, "I know." In September, a letter arrived from Mia's school. It wasn't urgent, not a warning or a concern, just a quiet envelope with a school logo and her name handwritten across the front. Inside was an invitation, Parent-Student Legacy Night. A new tradition, they said, an evening for students to share a story or a memory with someone who shaped them, someone who had stayed. "You don't have to go," Mia said when she handed it to him. "It's kind of cheesy." Dominic turned the envelope over in his hands. "Is that your official opinion?" She shrugged, chewing on her thumbnail. "It just feels big, like it's for kids who've always had someone." He didn't answer right away. He sat beside her on the couch and said, "Or maybe it's for kids who finally do." The night of the event, Mia wore the same sparkly clips from the court date. Dominic wore the bear pin she gave him on Father's Day, attached right above his heart. They walked into the school gym and took their seats at the round table assigned to them, table 6. Other kids were already reading stories or showing drawings. One had built a Lego model of their family. Another read a letter to their grandmother. Mia's name was third from the end. When it was her turn, she stood slowly, walked to the front of the room with a folded paper in her hand, and cleared her throat. "Hi, I'm Mia Vale," she began, her voice steady. "A lot of people in my life started as strangers, and then one day, one of them didn't stay a stranger." The room went still. Even the parents stopped shifting in their seats. "I used to think love was something you had to earn, that maybe it came if you were quiet enough, or good enough, or easy. But then I found someone who stayed even when I wasn't quiet, or good, or easy." She looked down at her paper, then back up. "My story didn't start simple, but it got better the moment someone knelt down and didn't walk away." She didn't cry. She didn't even falter. She just stood there holding the truth in her hands like it weighed nothing anymore. And Dominic, sitting at table 6 with Bear tucked beside him in Mia's tote bag, felt his heart do that familiar thing it always did when she looked at him like that, like he was a lighthouse, not just a man, a direction, a reason. After the applause, she returned to her seat and leaned against him. "I didn't use your name too much," she whispered. "I didn't want to make it about you. It's about both of us." He rested his hand over hers. It was perfect. "You think so?" "I think," he said quietly, "that I've never been prouder to be part of something in my entire life." They stayed until the end, helped stack chairs, said goodbye to teachers, and as they walked to the car under the warm night sky, Mia slipped her hand into his and said, "You know what I want for my birthday? You already have a treehouse and a whole art room. What else could you possibly need?" She looked up at him with a smile that was growing more sure by the day. "I want to help someone else get found." He didn't answer right away, but when they got home, long after she'd fallen asleep, he opened his laptop, searched for local mentorship programs, and signed up. Because she was right. Some stories don't end, they multiply. By October, the leaves outside the house turned into soft, rust-colored confetti. Mia began collecting them on her walks home from school, pressing them flat between the pages of her sketchbook. "They're little pieces of change," she explained one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the sunroom with Bear watching from a nearby chair. "They fall because the tree is making space for new things. It's not sad, it's smart." Dominic watched her carefully arrange each leaf by shade and shape, her tongue poking out just slightly in concentration, and wondered, not for the first time, how someone so small could carry so much clarity. She didn't overthink things. She felt them, trusted them, made meaning from them, and then She shared them like gifts. That night she brought out a new drawing and placed it in front of him at dinner. This one wasn't of them, it was of a tree, but the branches were labeled trust, time, listening, staying, warm hands, knowing when to be quiet, not leaving. At the very base, in bold letters, what it takes to grow a family. "Is it a gift?" Dominic asked. She shook her head. "It's a map." "For what?" "For next time." He looked at her, confused. "The next girl," she said. "Or boy, or whoever, the one you help find next." She wasn't looking at him like a kid fishing for praise. She was looking at him like someone handing off a baton, like someone who had already decided the world had enough people disappearing and not enough people showing up. Dominic leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Are you sure there's room for someone else?" Mia smiled. "You made room for me. I think we can make more." He didn't respond right away. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Then we will." The next weekend, they volunteered at a youth center on the other side of the city, just for the afternoon, just to meet people. Mia helped with art projects, read stories to kids younger than her, and gave away a stack of her leaf bookmarks. Dominic talked to one of the directors. They asked if he wanted to fund a scholarship program. He said yes, but also asked what they needed most. "Time," the director said. "Money helps. But what these kids really need is people who keep showing up." Dominic understood. That night, when they got home, Mia was quiet in the car, thoughtful, staring out the window as the city lights rolled by. "Did it feel weird?" she asked. "Being there?" "No," he said. "It felt like a beginning." "That's what I thought too," she said. She didn't say much else. But when she got out of the car, she handed him a new drawing. A stick figure version of him holding hands with two kids now, one with short hair, one with a big smile. Bear was in the picture, of course. Mia stood beside them, arms crossed like a boss. And above it all, in her messy, confident handwriting, "When one heart stays, others find it." Dominic didn't sleep much that night. Not because he was anxious, but because he was awake with the clarity of someone who finally understood his purpose. She had found him by accident, but he would find others on purpose. Because when a little girl walked into his life holding a drawing, she didn't just give him a daughter, she gave him a reason. The first time Dominic brought another child into their home, it wasn't planned, not officially, not yet. His mentorship at the youth center had grown from quiet conversations into deeper connections, and one afternoon he got a call from the director. "There's a boy," she said. "His name is Theo. He's 10. We've placed him temporarily twice in the last month, but it's not sticking. He's quiet, smart, doesn't trust anyone, and honestly, we're running out of options." Dominic didn't hesitate. "Bring him." Mia was waiting by the window when the car pulled up. She didn't speak, didn't rush to greet him. She just watched as the boy stepped out. Small frame, hoodie too big for him, a backpack worn down at the edges. He didn't look at the house, didn't look at Dominic. Just followed the director to the door like he'd done this a dozen times before. Because he had. "This is temporary," Theo said, before anyone could explain anything. His voice was flat, his eyes careful. "I don't unpack anymore." Dominic nodded. "Okay. I'm not calling anyone Dad. That's fair. And I don't eat weird vegetables." Mia snorted before she could stop herself. Theo looked over at her. She raised her hand in a small wave. "You like grilled cheese?" she asked. He shrugged. "Who doesn't?" "Then you'll survive here." That night they made 3 sandwiches, no vegetables, extra crispy. Mia let Theo have the seat next to Bear. Didn't comment when he sat with his shoulders hunched, one foot already pointed toward the exit. Didn't ask him questions. She just passed him the ketchup and said, "You can sleep in the guest room. I put a flashlight under the pillow, just in case." Dominic watched the two of them, one certain, one holding back, and saw something he recognized, the space between being alone and being almost safe. For the next week, Theo stayed quiet. He didn't draw, didn't join in on movie night, but he never left, never pushed back. He just hovered like a ghost waiting to be given form. Until one afternoon, Mia appeared in Dominic's office holding a piece of paper. "He drew this," she whispered. "I think he left it by accident." Dominic unfolded the drawing. It was rough, unsure, but it was clear. A house, a couch, 3 figures sitting on it, one holding a book, one with crossed arms, one with a hoodie pulled low over his eyes, and on the floor beside them, bare. Dominic looked at her. "What do you think it means?" She shrugged. "I think it means he's not on the outside anymore." That night Dominic made spaghetti, and Theo asked for seconds. The next day he helped carry groceries inside. By the weekend he was sitting on the floor next to Mia, sorting leaves by color, asking if Bear had ever been to the beach. Dominic listened from the kitchen, heart full in the quietest way. They hadn't said the word family, but it was happening anyway. Mia didn't need to be the only child. She had always known that. She just needed to know that love could multiply without breaking. And now Theo was starting to know it too. Dominic tucked them both in that night. One in the blue room, one in the yellow. He stood between their doors for a long time, listening to the silence. And then he went to his room, opened the drawer where he kept Mia's first drawing, and added Theo's next to it. One had said, "Don't forget me again." The other didn't say anything. But it didn't have to. It had been left where it could be found. That was enough. The house began to shift in quiet, permanent ways after Theo arrived, not with chaos or noise, but with echoes of presence. There were 2 backpacks by the door now, 2 sets of sneakers in the hallway, 2 voices arguing about who got the last toast or waffle. Mia adjusted easily, not like she was giving something up, but like she'd been waiting for the space to be shared. She taught Theo how to fold pancakes into triangles, how to sharpen colored pencils without breaking the tips, and how to ask Dominic for ice cream with just the right tilt of the head and timing. Theo, in turn, taught her how to beat level 6 of a video game she'd been stuck on for weeks. He didn't say much, but when he did, his words landed like facts that didn't need permission. One afternoon, Mia and Dominic were building a birdhouse on the back patio when Theo stood in the doorway, arms crossed, trying not to look interested. "We're using the kit from the hardware store," Mia said without looking up. "Not one of Dad's weird custom ones." Theo squinted. "It's not going to fall apart?" "Only if you sabotage it," Mia replied. "Which I feel like you might." Dominic didn't say a word, just handed Theo a paintbrush and scooted over on the bench. Theo sat, took the brush, dipped it in the sky blue paint. He didn't say anything, but when the birdhouse was done, he'd added his name on the side, right under Mia's. Smaller letters, but still there. Later that week, Dominic found Theo in the kitchen, alone, staring at a paper he'd brought home from school. "Trouble?" Dominic asked. "Parent night," Theo said. "Usually they assign someone, a staff person, so I don't have to go alone." Dominic dried his hands on a dish towel. "You want me to come?" Theo didn't answer, just shrugged, eyes still on the form. Then after a pause he said, "You'd probably hate it. It's loud. And there's singing." Dominic smiled. "I'll survive." Theo slid the form across the counter. "You have to sign." That night Mia climbed into Dominic's lap after dinner and said, "I think Bear likes him." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "That's the official verdict?" "Bear's a good judge of character. What about you?" She thought for a moment, then said, "He's like a cat." "How so?" "He wants to be near us, but not too near. You have to wait for him to come to you." "And what do we do while we wait?" "Stay." The word landed heavier than Dominic expected, because it had always been the answer. Not grand gestures, not promises, just presence. Steady, quiet, unmoving. Theo's parent night came a week later. The gym was packed. Paper stars on the walls, folding chairs everywhere, kids running in clusters. Dominic wore jeans. Theo wore a hoodie with a tiny pin Mia had made him. A bear. So I match, he said under his breath. They sat through performances, met teachers, visited Theo's locker. He didn't smile much, but he didn't hide either. When they left, walking back to the car under a sky full of stars, Dominic asked, "Was it okay?" Theo nodded. "Yeah." Then a little quieter. "No one looked at me like I didn't belong." "That's because you do," Dominic said. Theo didn't respond, but when they got home, he left his hoodie on the couch instead of his backpack, a small thing. But that was how he moved, 1 inch at a time. That night, Dominic checked on both rooms before bed. Mia was asleep, arms flung across the pillows, bare half hanging off the side. Theo wasn't asleep yet, but he didn't flinch when Dominic opened the door, just looked up and said, "Do you think I'll always be like this?" "Like what?" "Waiting for something to go wrong." Dominic stepped into the room, sat at the edge of the bed. "I think it makes sense that you feel that way. But no one here is planning to disappear." Theo stared at the ceiling. "But people say that and then they leave anyway." "I won't," Dominic said, "even if it's hard, even if it's messy. I'm here." Theo rolled over, pulling the blanket up to his chin. Mia said the same thing. Dominic smiled. "She's the bravest person I know." Theo didn't speak again. But he didn't ask for the door to be left open either. Progress, presence, roots, and just like before, it started with someone showing up and refusing to leave.